Whangaroa Bay, New Zealand, December 89. On the decks of the HMS Boyd, a 394-ton brigantine sailing under the flag of the mighty British Empire, the son of a Maori chief eyes the shorelines that he has waited too long to see. His name is Te Ara. He is a proud Maori, a member of the powerful and fearsome people who have ruled over the mainland of New Zealand since their arrival sometime between 1320 and 1350. They had originated in the Isles of East Polynesia and made their way to New Zealand via decades of expeditious canoe travel, moving further and further west on weeks or months-long journeys. The Maori had first seen European contact when the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman had reached their shores in 1642. He had been promptly chased out of the bay by Maori war canoes, blowing war trumpets that he noted to sound like the war bugles of the Moors. Tasman would name the bay Murderers Bay and never return. It would be 127 years until the Englishman Captain James Cook arrived in Poverty Bay during October of 1769. Te Ara spent the last year on board British vessels on an exchange trip of sorts that saw him travel thousands of miles throughout the South Pacific. He had found his way onto the Boyd as it had departed New South Wales, headed to New Zealand with 70 passengers on board. The AMS Boyd had travelled from England to bring a group of convicts to the penal colony in New South Wales. With the advent of Admiral Arthur Phillip's establishment of the colony where prisoners were set to work in manual labour, provided a free workforce to build Britain's ever-expanding empire. The Boyd had left New South Wales in October of 1809, with the intention of bringing back a profitable load of kauri lumber from the giant kauri trees that grew on the northern parts of New Zealand's northernmost islands. Te Ara had intended the trip to be relatively uneventful. He thought he would simply hitch a ride with the HMS Boyd back to the island of New Zealand. But this was still a formidable journey of well over 1,000 miles, and almost from the time they had left port in Australia, he and the captain of the HMS Boyd, a man named John Thompson, had been considerably at odds. The reason for this varies with different accounts. One account relays that Te Ara had been unwilling to assist in the duties of the ship, expected of all crew and passengers. According to this version, he saw such menial tasks as beneath his dignity as the son of a Maori chieftain. Another account states that the young man was framed with a disgruntled chef of the Boyd, who had thrown some silverware overboard and then blamed Te Ara for its disappearance. Either way, punishment doled out by Captain Thompson had been both swift and harsh. At the captain's orders, Te Ara was tied to a capstan, deprived of food, and whipped with a cat-o'-nine tails. Though the captain was technically within his rights, under British naval law, to enforce discipline and justice by any means necessary, subjecting the son of a Maori chief to such treatment without consideration of the larger socio-political ramifications would prove to be a very poor decision. Before the whipping was finished and the young man was untied from the capstan, he had already made a vow within himself to exact his revenge on not only the captain, but virtually the entire crew. They would pay dearly, he decided, for their insolence. He had, however, initially feigned remorse and reform. In the intervening few weeks since this day in December, and being subject to the torments of the cat-o'-nine tails, Te Ara had not only obeyed the captain's orders dutifully, but had managed to gain his trust and convince him that a detour to Whangaroa Bay would net him far more of the valuable kauri timber he had come to New Zealand to procure. In agreeing to do so, Captain Thompson had sealed the fates of all on board. Now, as the boy pulls into the picturesque waters of Whangaroa Bay, Te Ara feels a sense of elation, as he is not only so close to seeing friends and family again, but to exacting retribution for his mistreatment. Now, as the boy sits anchored not far from the shoreline in Whangaroa Bay, Captain Thompson and the crew take in their surroundings with equal parts awe and apprehension. For the vast majority on board, the sights of the harbour, with its vibrant green tree lines and chilly teal waters, contrasted strikingly with the volcanic plugs that jutted out from amongst its scenic hills, are unlike anything they have seen before. As they take in the grandeur of his homeland, Te Arara seizes his opportunity. He dives into the waters of the bay, and as the salt water stings the cuts still healing on his back from Thompson's punishment, swims with all his might until he reaches the shoreline. Shortly after reaching shore, the young Maori disappears into the dense tree line. Thompson and the crew are now left to wait, unsure of whether to cut their losses and head south, meaning they would have made this sizable detour for nothing, or to wait in hopes that Te Ara, whom they all now consider to be an ally, would return with his people in order to make good on his promises of lumber and riches. For 3 days, they sit anchored in the waters of the harbour. Then, just as all aboard have become exasperated with waiting and preparations to sail away are being made, a crewman alerts Captain Thompson a Maori canoe is making its way towards the vessel, professing overtures of peace and goodwill. The Maori on board pull their canoe next to the Boyd, and through gestures and sign language they convey to Captain Thompson that they are the party sent to lead himself and a small group to the best trees in the area, which lay at the Kale River on the north side of the bay. Captain Thompson, eager to lay eyes on the bounty he hoped to harvest before heading back south, agrees to follow the Maori in one of the Boyd's rowboats, accompanied by his chief officer, as well as 3 other men. The party sets off from the relative safety of the Boyd, excitedly following the Maori in the expectation of their first glimpse of the giant kauri trees they had heard so much about. They will never see their shipmates again. As soon as the party is out of sight of the Boyd, ostensibly heading up the Kale River, Captain Thompson, his chief officer, and the 3 men accompanying them are promptly bludgeoned to death at the hands of the Maori. The Maori then beach their own canoe and strip the dead Englishmen of their clothing and weapons. The bodies of the men are taken back to the Maori village, where they are promptly butchered into pieces to be roasted or simply consumed raw. The Maori warriors now wait until nightfall, when several of them don the clothing of the dead Englishmen and, under cover of dark and disguise, make their way back to the Boyd. As they do this, several other Maori canoes amass just out of sight of the Boyd's lookouts, ready to strike once the signal is given. The Maori, disguised as the captain and small crew, are able to climb aboard and swiftly kill the lookouts, who greeted them in the darkness, thanking them to be their comrades until their final fleeting moments. Zaying the initial attack on the sailors above board on the British vessel, the remaining Maori war canoes swarm the ship, and within minutes, the vast majority of the crew and passengers on board the Boyd lie cold and deaf, strewn about the ship. The Maori take 5 prisoners: passenger Anne Morley and her baby, Thomas Davis, a second mate whose name is unfortunately unrecorded, and the 2-year-old Elizabeth Brought. Meanwhile, 5 more people have managed to hide high up in the rigging of the ship, avoiding slaughter below and hiding for their lives. As the Maori canoes depart back to their village, the survivors cling to the masts and ropes, praying not to be seen. There they remain for the rest of the night, until the next morning they spot another Maori canoe coming towards the ship. At first, they are terrified. However, this canoe carries a chieftain from a neighboring band of Maori. This chief, an imposing man named Tapahi, has come with several members of his band to trade with the Whangaroans. However, the curious sight of the brigantine draws the interest of himself and his cohorts, and they make their way to the ship and climb aboard. They are startled to find the 5 survivors, who themselves are startled to find that Chief Tapahi and his men are willing to help them. Terrified that the Whangaroan Maori would return at any moment, the survivors quickly agree to scurry aboard the canoe and sneak away to shore before being noticed. However, just as they are able to reach the shore and attempt to find places to hide, they are horrified to see two Whangaroan canoes full of warriors paddling at them at full speed. Unable or unwilling to provide further assistance, Chief Tupai only sits and watches as his Maori compatriots fall upon the fleeing party with merciless disdain. All but one of the Boyd's passengers on the beach are cut down within moments. The remaining passenger, spared for reasons unknown, is dragged back to the village, where he sees the charred remains of his countrymen and joins the ranks of his unfortunate companions as prisoners. The Maori canoes then once again coalesce in front of the Boyd, towing the large vessel through sheer might and muscle to the nearby mudflats on Motuai, or Red Island. Here they can loot its valuable content at their leisure. For several days, the Maori ransack the holds of the Boyd. Sacks of flour are cut open and spread out in heaps upon the mud, with barrels of salt pork and bottles of wine meeting similar fates. Tragedy strikes, however, when the Maori uncover the cache of muskets, lead balls, and gunpowder kept aboard the hulking vessel. Unfamiliar with their proper usage, a Maori named Pio Pio creates a spark by releasing the hammer on one of the muskets. This starts a small fire that, within seconds, ignites the kegs of the gunpowder, causing an explosion that kills Pio Pio and 9 other Maori, including Tiara's father, instantaneously. The fire then spreads to the reserves of whale oil, which causes the hull of the ship that had not already been destroyed by the explosion to go up in flames. Over the next several hours, the Boyd is consumed by fire and reduced to a skeleton. It is subsequently declared tapu or prohibited, and none of the Maori venture near it again. The 3 adult survivors of the attack on the Boyd were then put to work as slaves, made to carry out menial tasks and perform heavy labor at the whim and will of their captor. The 2 men, Thomas Davis and the unnamed first mate, bear the brunt of the toil and abuse, until one day the first mate collapses while making fishing hooks. He is promptly done in by Maori war clubs, butchered and eaten. The young mother, Anne Morley, and her baby are left unharmed, as is the 2-year-old Elizabeth. However, they are given little to no food, nor shelter or clothing. For 3 weeks, the terrified survivors of the Boyd spend every waking moment unsure if it might be their last. Meanwhile, word begins to trickle from Maori village to Maori village, and news of what has happened to the Boyd eventually reaches the European settlements further south. The news reaches the Bay of Islands, where a whaling ship named the City of Edinburgh has come to port. The ship is captained by enterprising Scotsman Alexander Barry. Captain Barry organizes a rescue party with the intention of returning the captives alive by any means necessary. For days, the City of Edinburgh tears northward up the New Zealand coastline, pulling into any conspicuous bays in search of Maori villages. They are not long in finding their first village, which they quickly set upon and capture several members of. For the heavily armed and highly aggressive party, this is a relatively quick task. However, this band of Maori are the southern neighbors of the Whangaroans, the same band who had sought to help the survivors escape. With no way of knowing this, Captain Barry and his cohorts see them as necessary collateral in accomplishing their task at hand. The next day, the City of Edinburgh makes its way into Whangaroa Bay. The crew soon spot the hulking, burned-out remains of the Boyd scuttled in the mudflats. They follow the Kale River and sweep down upon the Whangaroan Maori, capturing a number of them before retreating to the relative safety of their ship. Here, with a sufficient number of hostages now secured, Captain Barry begins his hard-edged negotiations for the return of the survivors. He informs the captured Maori that he will kill them to a man and destroy their village should his countrymen not be returned. This strong-arm tactic works, as the Maori are wholly unwilling to lose the lives of their own in order to hold on to a few prisoners, who could provide little and required much. All 4 remaining members of the attack on the Boyd, Anne Borley, her infant daughter, Thomas Davis, and the toddler Elizabeth Brodden, are brought on board the city of Edinburgh. Though all are emaciated and traumatized, they are otherwise unharmed. But Captain Barry is not yet satisfied with the terms of release, and informs the Maori on board that they will be brought back to New South Wales to stand trial for their crimes, should they not return the Boyd's journals and logs. This request, too, is expeditiously met. In a final, though fleeting, attempt at an extra measure of retribution, Captain Barry insists the chiefs that he is releasing be stripped of their rank in any political or military power. This demand is agreed to, though even Barry knows it is highly unlikely it will actually be met in practice. The city of Edinburgh departs Whangaroa Bay, never to return. However, the plight of the survivors is not yet over. The ship makes its way to South America, stopping in Valparaiso, Chile for repairs and eventually traveling to Lima, Peru. Here, the young mother Anne Borley passes away, and her daughter is placed in a Spanish home. The toddler Elizabeth Brodden is also adopted by a wealthy Spanish couple who have been unable to have their own children. Thomas Davis goes to work for Captain Barry, ultimately meeting his demise drowning, while exploring the Shoalhaven River with Captain Barry in 1822. Back in New Zealand, the reverberations from the December 1809 massacre were still being felt the following spring. In March of 1810, sailors from the whaling ships Atalanta, Diana, Experiment, Perseverance, Speak, and New Zealander attack the island of Mochuapo in Whangaroa Bay. However, the village they attack is again part of the same band that had attempted to help the survivors. Chief Tepai, who had personally attempted to rescue the survivors, was wounded in the chest and neck during this attack. After fighting off the attack of the sailors, Tepai organizes the warriors he has remaining and recruits others from local bands to assist in attacking the Whangaroa. On or around April 28th of 1810, this group makes their attack on the Whangaroa village. The attack is ultimately repulsed, and Tepai is killed on the battlefield, the victim of a well-placed spear thrust. Though it had begun in 1807, the intertribal conflicts that would come to be known as the Musket Wars would intensify after the Boyd massacre, as the residual effects of European contact would not only stoke the political flames between feuding Maori bands, but supply them with the means to ensure their enemies' destruction. From 1807 until 1837, as many as 3,000 battles are fought between Maori bands. This conflict would see up to 40,000 Maori killed and 30,000 placed into slavery or forced out of their native land. But the countless stories of the Musket Wars, as well as the European expansion into both New Zealand and Australia, with its innumerable tales of tragedy and triumph, are for tonight. Other stories for other time. Thank you for tuning into this episode of History at the OK Corral. Don't forget to click like, share, subscribe, and if you'd like to support our work, click the link below in the description to become a subscriber on Patreon. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral. History too real for the Westerns.